Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Zombie Train. This is episode number 271, and I'm your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man. Today we have a question that was actually sort of asked on two separate episodes. First by... who was it? First by 2026 Productions, what did y'all do with the 12 C&O 284s? And then by Midwestern 261 in the following episode, saying, was 2716 or any of the other C&O Kanawas that survived, or any other Berkshires, 765, 757, 759, etc. I don't think you really finished that question, but I get what you mean. You want to know what happened to the Berks. And so I will start by saying the wheel arrangement, the 284, is an extremely robust and extremely useful wheel arrangement. And the engines, that is, largely came about at, towards the end of the steam era. And so a lot of these engines ended up in preservation and did fairly well. That said, there are not all that many compared to certain other engines that were more ubiquitous. There were about half as many as there were Northerns, and a third as many as, almost a third as many, or slightly more than a third, I should say, as Pacifics, and significantly less than a third as 10-wheelers, Prairies, a fourth as many as Mikados, and then it goes up crazier from there. There were only 21, just to give the numbers. There were 21 284s that were surviving, and they were not the most spread out. West Virginia, Vermont, Pennsylvania, frickin' New Hampshire, and then a lot of them were clustered a little bit closer. This one in Louisiana, Indiana, Illinois, Idaho, one in Colorado, 5 in California. Right? Oh no, that's... God damn it, I was clicking the wrong row. This row. West Virginia, 3 in Virginia, 2 in Pennsylvania, 5 in Ohio. A lot of them were clustered in the east. The Berkshires were not as popular of a wheel arrangement out west. Out west, they were mostly supplanted by mountain types. However, mountain types, not as many survived. If I go and look real quick, so mountain types were not as common of a wheel arrangement. 482s, where are they on my list here? There's 480s. That's, surprising number of 480s exist. Where are 482s on my list here? 484s, 284s, 482s. 14 of them. And those, like I said, were distributed a little bit more westerly. Montana has 3 of them, for example. And, yeah, they were clustered around the Rocky Mountains. They were a more popular wheel arrangement out there. Now, that said, Berkshires are extremely versatile. They're usually very fast engines, and we knew what we were getting into. We knew that there were a lot of Berks out there, and we knew that a lot of them belonged to the C&O, and a few of them, a lot of them belonged to the nickel plate as well, so we knew we'd have a lot of relatively interchangeable parts on engines that we could get running moderately easily. These were like Tier 2 repairs. So, we would have to do some work on them, we might have to rebuild them, but they were not in bad condition. So, and it started with a Tier 0, it started with 765, which was one of the first engines that wasn't 3254 that the Zombie Train used, and eventually handed off to the Toronto Raillands because we felt they were responsible enough to sort of operate autonomously in their sphere of influence, which they were. They did very well, especially when we were away. And they sort of did a Zombie Train Incorporated thing before the Zombie Train Incorporated existed. So, they, we entrusted them with that engine knowing that they would do well with it, and they exceeded our expectations. That said, we gave them a good engine. Arguably, we gave them a better engine than our engine, and the reason was because we had made a lot of modifications. It's sort of like a sunk cost. We'd done a lot of work to our engine, and we were very familiar with our engine. And also, we weren't in the business of changing engines. We had one train, it was pulled by one engine, and with everything we'd done, it wasn't worth sort of redoing it all onto a different engine. So we said, this engine is functional, we used it for a couple of things, it's your turn now, you're going to be stewards of your area, and if you think, if you want to be stewards of your area, you're going to want a good locomotive. Here you go, here's this one. 765 went off to the Toronto Rail Lands. The other engines like her, the other nickel plate Berks we brought back, some slowly, some quickly, depended on the condition. Obviously the one at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania was a little bit worse for wear, but there were other ones that are better. The one at this point, at the incomplete Age of Steam Roundhouse, pretty good condition, all things considered. And then, the others, we sort of played it by ear. The C&O ones were a little bit more scattered, a little bit more, I didn't know the whereabouts of all of them. I had a pretty good handle on the nickel plate ones. And we sort of knew that we'd be getting into another can of worms by trying a different kind of engine. But the C&O Berkshires were some of the first engines that we went for, period, that weren't already running. We went to Strasbourg, we got the engines that were running, we got other engines that were runnable or were, tier 1, where we could basically just give them a 1472 and move on with our lives. Sorry. And have an engine to run. But these were some of the first tier 2s that we embarked on, where it was, okay, the engine is down, and it hasn't had a lot of work in recent years, or, relatively ever, but it is the kind of thing where we should be able to source parts, we should be able to get it running with very little effort. And again, the idea was there are an unprecedented number of these engines that survive, others in this class. And that means not only interchangeable parts, or, parts that we can pretty much mass manufacture, relatively speaking, compared to the other manufacturing that was being done for Zombie Train Incorporated engines. And we can train engineers for these engines, and they'll be able to run them all over the system. So Berkshires very, very quickly became a mainstay of the Zombie Train Incorporated. It was really something else to almost overnight seeming go from okay, we've got a couple of engines, a handful of engines, to okay, we have a couple dozen engines. And that was mostly thanks to Berkshires. That was, it was important. It was important. And, I don't know, we were lucky. We were lucky. So yeah, that's what happened to the Berkshires. They really, aside from way out west, where we weren't sure about the ability of the Berkshires to perform in the mountains, and we started using heavier power as soon as possible. Usually, when we got a new engine, early on, if it was a bigger engine, it went out west immediately, and if it was a Berkshire or smaller, it stayed east. And some of the engines, like 844, were already out west, but that sort of set the precedent of, back east, we don't necessarily need northerns, out west we definitely do. And so, the biggest projects, the biggest engines are going to go that way, and not stick around. So, yeah. What else is there to say? And I can't say anything really specific, because they're all blurred together in my mind. I don't know. I don't remember everything. But I do remember how important those engines were. and how useful they were, having so many very similar engines. And we kept one. No matter how dire things got with motive power, we always kept one engine, one of those C&O Berkshires usually, in reserve, because they were an engine that was, relatively speaking, easy to learn, or at least had a very large number of crews that knew how to run it. And, so that gave it an advantage. Also, being the reserve engine, it saw a lot of weird random duties, although the reserve engine was a rotating position. If something went down, it would usually be, okay, now we need to get another engine, whatever one has the lightest workload, in to be the new reserve engine. The reserve engine is going to go out to replace whatever engine that was. The engine that's a problem is going to go into rebuild. And once the engine finishes rebuild, we establish either the reserve engine or the rebuild engine, which was going to return to service. It was sort of like, and I had somebody, many years ago explain this to me about the way they service fighter jets in the military. And it was if you take a plane out of service, it becomes the parts plane. And, if you're waiting for a part for that plane, which means that plane is now the parts plane for all the other planes, so that the other planes, if they break down, they can give them parts off of the parts plane and get them flying again and just order that part that they needed, and they'll eventually put it back on the parts plane. However, if a plane was out for too long, it would become what they called the hangar queen, which meant it had to go and do a whole bunch of inspections before it could get back in service. We on the Zombie Train Incorporated tried to sort of streamline our inspection process because we were strapped for time and power a lot, but we would have those issues, and we did establish a system whereby engines, if they were not running for a certain length of time, or if they were running for a certain length of time, either or, they would go in for a rebuild. We sort of played with the FRA rules. In some cases, used our better judgment. The footage is about to end here, but there's a little bit longer, a little bit more time of just black screen. Sorry about that. Tane crashed. But, yeah, if an engine was out of service for a long time, it would usually go through a rigmarole of inspections. However, the inspections for the backup engine were usually conducted on a fairly regular basis, so that if the backup engine was needed, it would get fired up immediately and sent out, and there wouldn't be any waiting. And that happened a number of times, and eventually we started having more than one, but because you just can't predict necessarily when breakdowns are going to happen, and when you're running a railroad so large and you are under the circumstances that we were under, it's definitely a situation where sometimes you have to make some judgment calls, and you have to have backups, and you have to be ready for when things go wrong. And thankfully, we never had a backup engine that proved to not be what we needed it to be. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next week. Trainman out.